We don't subscribe to the old school way, nor the new school way, only the optimal way. The 80-20 baseball experience with Coach Bo.
Welcome. This is Coach Bo with 80-20 Baseball, and this is episode 28. I do hope you're all staying strong these days, and I hope you're all making the most out of today. The three things that we're going to be discussing here in episode 28 are, number one of the wisest coaches in the history of baseball and what we can learn from him. We're going to discuss who he is and some specific things we can learn. He's definitely a well-known name in the baseball community, but if you're a casual coach or a parent that's coaching a team or even new to the game of baseball in terms of coaching, this name isn't going to be somebody that's just really going to stand out. But I'll tell you what, those of you that know baseball through and through, especially the coaching world, you know this guy's name, and we're going to discuss what we can learn from him specifically and how we can use his wisdom to be better coaches. The second thing we're going to cover today is something that's super important. It's more of a paradigm, a viewpoint that we need to keep as coaches to both optimize our players right now and to optimize their skills, their swing, their pitching delivery, how they feel the baseball, run the bases, so on and so forth. We need to keep a paradigm that both looks at and keeps in perspective what our players can currently do physically, and we also need to make sure that we share that same it's kind of a joint paradigm that we also understand that that's not necessarily the long-term optimal goal, the optimal pitching delivery, the optimal swing. So we need to understand some things that have to do with that, and we'll get into that in part 2. And in part 3, we are going to talk specifically about playing first base. In my opinion, a overlooked position defensively. If you think about just the infielders, third base, shortstop, second base, first base, first base touches the baseball and is involved in more plays by a large margin over any of the other positions. So I think that's important to keep in mind when we go to set up our practices and to allocate our time when it comes to training and how we place the value of importance on certain positions. Every position is important, absolutely. But I think first base is super important, and I believe more runs can be saved at first base by a couple simple, changes than probably any other spot on the infield. Again, outside of catcher and pitcher. Obviously, catching and pitching is paramount when it comes to any player out on the defense. When in fact, I actually consider a pitcher an offensive position because I think pitchers need to think offensively. They have the ball. They dictate the inning. They should dictate the inning, the game, the pitch, the at-bat. Catching is by far, in my opinion, and especially at the lower levels, is by far, again, when I say lower levels, I mean especially, but obviously all the way through pro ball is by far, in my opinion, the most important defensive position. But when it comes to outside of those positions, I think first base is something. There are some simple moves that can really make a big difference, saving a lot of runs, and we'll talk about those here in part 3. All right, part 1, this coach that I speak of. This coach has some of my utmost admiration, and I've never actually played for this coach. I did play against him, and I've known about him for 20 years, and a really good friend of mine actually played for him in a summer up in Alaska with the Fairbanks Gold Panners. This coach's name is Ed Sheff. And Ed Sheff is a well-known coach in the coaching community and a well-respected coach in the baseball community. But he's not a coach that, an Augie Garrido, that the name jumps off the page and almost anybody who follows baseball at all would know. It's not Tony La Russa and some of these. It's just not one of these bigger names that is so well known that, everybody knows. But that's neither here nor there for this part. You got to trust me. Ed Sheff, Coach Sheff, was an absolute amazing coach. His wisdom, he's willing to share it too. You got to really dig for it. Some of the wisdom that he puts out there. One of the best spots is collegiate baseball. Collegiate baseball puts out I recommend everybody getting that. I think that's something that every coach should read. And I believe that it's Lou Popovich who does that. And man, what a great newspaper kind of magazine. You can get the digital edition. Okay, so Ed Sheff puts a lot of good stuff out in there over the years, and if you dig, you can find some great stuff. But here's the thing. I'll kind of break it down for you right now, so you don't really have to go digging. I'm not going to cover every amazing thing that this guy did because, again, I saw him work with his teams, but I never sat there at Lewis and Clark State and watched him practice. And, I want to get Coach Sheff on this. And he would be one of my top 5 interviews that I want to get on here, and I'm going to work to try to get Coach Sheff. He retired, and, time is precious. Time is valuable to everybody. So if I could get him on, that would just be an amazing thing for the baseball community. And something that really stood out the most out of all the things that Coach Chef did so amazingly was that he created a training environment, a practice environment that was more challenging than the game, but also very game-like. If I could sum it up into one sentence, what Ed Chef did so well with his practice, his training periods, his practices, his practice time, was that he made it uber challenging, and he always kept it as authentic to the game as he could. And to me, this is just so paramount. When you're designing any drill or any training of any sort, I believe that the whole thing doesn't need to be more challenging than a game. But your practice should have a big chunk of it that's more challenging, more difficult, and harder than the game is going to be. To give you a specific difficulty level that I would keep in mind as a coach, I would consider the average playoff game, or even the upper caliber, the higher caliber playoff teams that you're going to face, and think about how fast they play the game, how quick they go about it, how hard they hit the ball, how fast they pitch, or how sharp they're breaking balls. I mean, you can go on and on about how fast they their base runners are, how well they play defense, and how well they say like take away a bunt and things like that, and consider all that into how you design and practice and your training drills and things like that. And what I recommend is using the 20-40-40 ratio, something close, plus or minus. It doesn't have to be dead on. I like 20-40-40 because when you think about like say 10 reps or 50 reps, you can do the math really easily with those numbers. But the 20-40-40 ratio is as follows: 20% of the reps, 20% of the practice, specifically say to a particular drill, maybe a round of BP or to a round of ground balls, base running, things like that. The drill should be, in my opinion, close to this ratio. 20% slightly easier than the game. I like this as kind of a warm-up and a prep at the beginning of a drill. I believe then you follow it with 40% of the reps of the training of the practice of that particular drill being similar or identical to like upper caliber competition. And then I would follow it with 40%, so 4 out of 10 of the reps being more difficult than the hardest game your team's going to play all year. This takes some thought, it takes presence, it takes awareness, but it can be done, and it will improve as you get better. It doesn't have to be precise, but kind of that ballpark. You basically start off, say any drill, 20% of it. Not every drill is going to work out so you can do the 20-40-40. But you're going to try to do your best to get that. I believe that's the best because it gets a little bit of everything mixed in there. I'm sure some coaches would say, let's just go more difficult than the game at all times. I do think confidence and mindset plays into it. I also think that the body needs a second in every particular drill to kind of get the flow of it going, the movements going. And you can say, well, hey, we warm up our players really well and, they should be prepared before every drill. I get that, but it doesn't hurt to just have them go through it slightly easier than a typical game, just slightly slower. And that may be just one rep, maybe a couple reps. And then you get into the game speed, the real game speed, and then you take it up a notch after that. And this is what Coach Chef did so well. He had this team training harder than the game for a good part of his practices. And this is from what I've gathered from reading a lot and talking to players that have played with him. And Coach Chef also made sure that he kept everything super authentic. Here's a specific example. When batting practice was going on at Lewis and Clark State, he would bring in alumni, people from the city, from the area that had the afternoon off or could come out and throw batting practice. And he would bring in lefties and righties, and he would try to get arms out there that could throw the ball well. So instead of him going out there with some of his coaches, not only do the coaches not necessarily have the best arms for batting practice, the coaches also need to work with the hitters. If you learn a lot about kind of how he ran his batting practices, there was a lot going on at one time. I mean, the defense was involved, the base running, there was just a lot going on. So if a batting practice needs a coach to throw the pitches, then that attention is going to be very limited, or something's going to be sacrificed. Either they're throwing terrible batting practice or they're not coaching up their team as best they can. So he would get players or alumni, ex-players, or people from the town to come out and do this. And I thought that was just ingenious because now he's not only, now you could use up your own arms too. So if you got a big staff, or say you got some pitchers that just don't get in a lot, I don't think it's a bad idea to have them go through a batting practice, especially if you have pitcher onlys and they're not expected to pitch anytime in the next couple days. If you have a PO, I would recommend do that. But I think that was an awesome idea of bringing out lefties and righties, and he'd bring guys who could run it up their upper 80s, mid 80s. So he wasn't just throwing out guys just tossing cookies and making batting practice easy. Another specific example of how he looked to keep things game-like and game speed was during the game between innings. He wouldn't just have his infielders take up ground ball, a throw from the first baseman. They wouldn't have him just toss the ball over and then have them field it and then just, casually throw it back. He was turning double plays, and his thing was, how many double plays can we turn? And it was game speed and it was fast. And I did get a chance to see this and it was pretty impressive. Coach Chef did not follow the baseball world like a sheep. He was the opposite. I don't think he was looking to do things to be contrarian, but he was always looking to optimize every part of the game. For youth coaches and youth practices, you may not have the time or the energy after your long day of working another job to be able to, optimize and change and adapt everything that he did. But there's definitely some things that he did that were awesome and could be learned from, but also just that paradigm of how he looked at the game. I think one of the best things we can do, from my perspective as somebody who's trying to help coaches, is to help change the paradigm, the viewpoint. So when you get out there, it's kind of like what I want to do is help change and improve the operating system, not just plug in a bunch of just random apps, right? Like, so if you're looking at your phone, you got the operating system and then you have these apps and I think if we can improve the operating system, if I can kind of guide the operating system for you coaches, then you can go out there and see it from your perspective and you can create a practice, a training session, a pregame routine, an in-game coaching strategy that works best for your team using these principles and these ideas that guide you. And they're not like specific, it's got to fit. So it's kind of like a blueprint. It's kind of parameters. Coach Chef was amazing at having the operating system that when he looked at a practice, he wanted to see how he could challenge his players while making it very game-like. And then he just didn't follow the baseball world like a sheep. He didn't just roll his infielders out there before the inning and have them just toss the ball back and forth and roll some grounders from first base. He looked at it like, hey, can this be better? And can this help us win more games? And I'll tell you what, players just like that. Like, they like practices like that. They like things where it's not monotonous, and they like it when they have to think and stay in the moment, because when you're in the moment, good things happen. When you're present, good things happen. And when you're not, your mind starts to run away, your mind starts getting distracted. And a player that has their mind and has the ability to or the time to think about a bunch of different things, that's no good, right? The idle mind is the devil's playground. It's not good in baseball. So keeping them busy, always having something to do. And that's really what he did. So I just covered a couple good examples. I would love for Coach Chef to write a book or do something that could share some of that knowledge. He's just one of those great coaches that's out there. So Coach Chef, Lewis and Clark State. Just go Wikipedia all of his stuff. Go Google Coach Chef. He's definitely worth the time. He's one of the cream of the crop coaches out there, and he's just not as well known. I mean, Coach Garrido was amazing. But he's well known, and he does have a book, and many of you have probably read it, and if not, read that book. But Coach Chef, I believe, is one of those coaches that kind of fell under the radar, and he's a game changer when it comes to learning and kind of studying what he did. And it just, we'll get into it more down the road. Like I said, I'd love to have him come on, and maybe I'll reach out here in the near future. I've been trying to get out these episodes with the 3 parts to really get a lot of good content quickly. But I have, like I've done with Coulter Bostic a couple episodes ago, I do like the interview podcast format, and I definitely would like to do some of these down the road. But if I'm going to do them, I want to bring on some great interviews for you guys and coaches that can really, really be game changers in terms of learning. All right, part 2. An athlete's current movement abilities, along with their current physical restrictions and constraints, need to be coached around, while simultaneously coaching up, training up, and correctly getting them to have better movement patterns as part of a well-rounded fitness program, a fitness program that optimizes overall athleticism. So your players are going to have current physical abilities. They're going to have current movement abilities, but that's not necessarily, and in many cases, almost in every case, that does not mean that's their optimal movement. For example, the other day I was talking with a coach and he said, hey, I got this pitcher. He's striding a little bit closed off to the plate. He's not striding in line with home plate or to his target, the glove. And so it was an acute angle of about 10 to 15 degrees. Now, the coach said, what's optimal? And I said, I believe a pitcher that can stride straight towards his target is optimal. But really just trying to get them to line up and really move towards their target, right towards their target, in direction with their target, the catcher's glove or home plate. I told him, I said, Coach, your pitcher optimally should be able to stride towards home plate. But what happens a lot of times in this specific case, and in a lot of cases with movements, the player cannot do it. The player cannot do it because of physical constraints. And it is what it is. Right now, you're coaching the player, the pitcher, the hitter, the fielder, the base runner that you have. Your catcher is what he is right now. You are coaching him to optimize his abilities right now. And so that may be something that leads you, or it may lead you to coaching him a little differently than the perfect way. Or, you learn that the pitchers should all do this, or the best way to pitch, the best pitching delivery has this involved. Yes, that may be true, but your pitcher right now can't physically do it. So work within the parameters and then set a fitness program that optimizes all those deficiencies, those movement deficiencies. Again, I'm putting mental deficiencies aside here. This is just physical deficiencies. For example, if your player can't swing a bat because he's 9 years old and he's trying to use a bat like all the other players, one, you can get a lighter bat for him. But if he wants to swing the bat that all the other players, kind of that size that all the other players are using, he may not be able to do it exactly like he should be able to, but that's all right. Get the strength going on the side. Get him into a fitness program that optimizes the ability to swing that bat, especially as he gets older. You don't want to just be going your whole life through your whole baseball career, whatever it is, and not being able to physically do things. You would like to have a fitness program that optimizes overall athleticism. And so it's a two-pronged approach. One, you're working with what they can do now. And then two, you're working, like, for example, I see a lot of pitchers that have bad hips. Their hips are not mobile. Their hips are weak. Their back, their lower back, their torso posture is bad. They got a lot of physical issues. So you work with what they can do now, but on the side, you're getting them to have better future movement. So that was part two. So you're working with their capabilities now to best get to an optimal. So I gave you, like, for example, here's one. Sometimes pitchers can't lift their leg lift high enough because their hips are weak, their lower back, their abdominal muscles are weak. They lose posture as they lift their leg lift, their leg kick. I call it a leg lift. And so what they do is they start to arch their back to kind of get their leg up further. I would recommend not arching the back. I would recommend the pitcher just maybe do a half leg lift and go from there. Those are tons of examples of what I'm talking about when there's physical constraint. As players get older, it's usually not a strength issue. It's more of a mobility issue because they've been sitting at a desk in school for 13 years or more. They've been sitting there playing video games, unfortunately, and these, technology, which isn't bad necessarily, but, a lot of sitting in cars, a lot less moving as a youth. And so these mobility issues start to come up as they get older, like college, even like varsity players that get real strong from a good workout, a good weightlifting program, but they haven't done mobility work. So typically when you're young, you're trying to build that strength. And as they get older, you're trying to keep the mobility going. Again, those are just generalizations. It goes across the board kind of for all of them too. But that's how you want to approach it. So if your player can't do something, you don't want to force them into doing something like, oh, you got to have a high leg lift. Well, maybe you can't get it up. Hey, you got to stride straight. Or, hey, you got to swing this bat. Well, maybe they can't swing that bat like that. Maybe they're going to dip. Maybe their arm's not, what have you. It's going to look a little different, but that gives you something to shoot for. That gives you something that you can work to optimize. So part two, to sum it up, athletes have current movement abilities. They have current physical constraints. So work within those, coach within those to best get the best. So if you learn, if you listen to a pitching coach or you listen to a hitting coach or an infield coach and they say, hey, this is how they should do it, or this is the best way, or this is a great way to do it, try to get your athlete right now, your players right now to get as close to that as they can, but be realistic with their abilities right now. And those are all going to be a little unique to each player. But on the side, you should look at that as kind of like, okay, well, not on the side, but as you're doing that work, look at those deficiencies and then kind of build your fitness program for that player, the strength, mobility, stability program, the conditioning program on the side to optimize that player's abilities and movement. Specifically, we're talking about physical movement here, more athleticism, which is just kind of a broad term for just really good quality movement all around. Now, one thing I highly recommend, especially for you coaches that can get your players into the program, into an organization, or on a team well before the official season starts. I highly recommend you guys spend a good amount of time, maybe a couple months or more, maybe 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, doing a ton and allocating a lot of your practice and training time to quality movement, strengthening, mobility, training, med balls, workouts, lunge, split squat, you name it, deadlift. There's 20, 30, 40 good exercises, lateral lunges, all sorts of stuff. You get into plyo balls. There's a whole bunch of great things you can do to get your players stronger, swinging underweighted and overweighted bats, and go on with a good quality training program. I recommend you spend that time beforehand. High school coaches, I think you should get your players September and October. I wouldn't even have them start throwing. I would forego any scrimmages or anything like that. I wouldn't even have them start throwing. I'd allocate any throwing time, any pitching time to getting stronger and getting more fit. And when I say stronger, I mean mobile too. I don't just want you to be a big meathead out there on the mound or as a hitter or whatnot. So with that said, those are some kind of a paradigm, a viewpoint to look at an athlete's current mobility versus where you're trying to get them, work with what they can do, then set a program that gets them better. I highly recommend before you jumping into a bunch of practice times, especially when it comes to throwing and pitching, I recommend you build up that strength. Like I said, I highly recommend this with pitching. All right, part 3, playing first base. This is one of those positions that I think gets a little, it's not as coached as much as it probably should be, and that is what it is, but I'm here to help. First basemen need to have a pre-pitch routine. They need to ask themselves some questions. Do I need to be holding the runner right now or not? If it's a trailing runner, no. So if there's a runner at second, you don't need to hold that runner at first. If there's bases loaded, you don't need to hold the runner at first. So the first question, a simple question, and most first basemen can do this in their sleep. They just know automatically when there's a situation where they need to hold the runner. Pre-pitch part 2. They need to look at the hitter and ask themselves, is this one of those rare push bunt hitters? Is this a hitter that has shown in the past or is maybe likely to do a push bunt? And if so, you got to move up and move a little to the right accordingly. That's assuming that you're not holding the runner on. Then, if it's a normal hitting situation or in a normal hitting situation and the first baseman does not need to hold the runner, the question they need to ask themselves is, how far can I get from the bag from first base and still be able to, how far can I position myself from the bag and still be able to arrive on time to take a throw from the infielders if they get the ground ball hit to them? So how far can you get from the bag? And we'll talk a little bit more in a second about that. In a second, meaning like right now, actually, the next bullet point here that I got. With lefties, generally speaking, you're going to play the percentages unless you have a top-notch scouting report. I typically think depth is more important than side-to-side positioning. But I think with a lefty hitting, a lefty up the bat, for a first baseman, if you're not holding the runner on, I reckon, or if there's not a play like at the plate and you got to play up a little bit, again, just like a normal situation, not necessarily a double play, but just maybe nobody on. With a left-handed hitter, first baseman should be a little bit more concerned with some depth. And with a right-handed hitter up, the first baseman should be a little bit more aware of maybe shading the 3-4 hole a little bit more than they are depth. Again, if you have a great scouting report, this can definitely change. So it's just kind of a general rule of thumb, especially for youth coaches that don't typically have outstanding scouting reports or enough a sample size on their scouting report to make a definitive decision on that. One thing that's super important on the pre-pitch routine for a first baseman is to ask themselves or to look over and see where the second baseman is playing. If the second baseman is playing for a left-hander to pull or for a right-handed hitter to go oppo a little bit more, they're playing that 3-4 hole, they're playing close to the first baseman. The first baseman needs to know this. And if they're playing up the middle, the second baseman that is, if they're playing up the middle, the first baseman needs to know this. It determines when they're probably going to go or not go for a ball. It also lets them know if they need to maybe slide a little or not. Now, if you slide with the second baseman, say the second baseman goes to play up the middle and the first baseman wants to slide a little more towards the hole, that may not be what the scouting report is best saying or is what the hitter, necessarily in need of in terms of defensive positioning. So I don't think you should, as a first baseman, just go with the second baseman, but it gives you an idea of, hey, the second baseman is shading right over the hole. He's right behind me or he's close to me. I'm not necessarily going to go for a ground ball to my right. I might go cover the bag. This leads me to the after contact priorities. This is something I see get screwed up even at the major league level. Once the ball is hit, it could be hit anywhere, but specifically maybe towards first base. The first baseman's first job is to field the baseball. If it's hit towards them or near them and it's within their range, their first job is to get the baseball. I don't understand these first basemen that just let the ball go through the hole and then they look over like, hey, second base, I thought that was you. Or worse, I've seen first basemen, even at the professional level, on a ball not that far to their right, within diving range and sometimes within just, snagging range on their feet. I've seen them, right when the ball's hit, dart towards first base to cover the bag when the ball's going into right field. So it's neither here nor there. It's once you get out of like 9U and 10U baseball, those balls to right field are pretty much not getting thrown to first base for an out. So first baseman, first priority, get the ball if it's hit around you and you can get to it. Back to that one thing I said just a minute ago. If the second baseman is shading over behind you or near you to your right, then that might be the time you know right where they're at. And this could change each pitch. That second baseman may be there in an 0-0 pitch, but when it gets 0-2, he may slide a little bit up the middle. Maybe it's off speed time. Maybe he's shifting a little bit more, thinking pull a little bit more than opposite field, say like with a righty up or whatnot. Or maybe he slides over because he sees, that the pitcher's throwing some changeups and he sees some or whatever. It doesn't matter. First baseman, just look at the second baseman. Where's he at? And adjust accordingly. Now, if he's coming over towards you, maybe you shade a little bit more towards the line. Not only do you not necessarily go for the ball that he's going to get, but also it kind of dictates a little bit to where you might position yourself pre-pitch. So first baseman, ask yourself, do you need to hold the runner on? Yes or no? Don't hold a trailing runner on, in my opinion. I would never do this. Number 2, ask yourself, is this one of those rare push bunt hitters? If so, you got to move up and move a little to the right accordingly. Next, if it's a normal hitting situation, you're not holding a runner on, how far away from the bag can I get and still arrive to the bag on time to take a throw? Thinking range. I want to think about how much range can I get while also being able to get to the bag and set up and be ready for a throw. With lefties, you're going to play a little deep. With left-handed hitters, you're going to play a little deeper. Typically on this, with right-handers, you might shade a little bit more towards the 3-4 hole. But again, that's going to be, according to each hitter, is going to have their own plan. Now, the last thing you ask before the pitch, where's the second baseman playing? If he's shading over behind you, maybe you play the line a little more. We don't want to overlap too much when it comes to territory. That's the key. All right. So if the second baseman's playing up the hole or up the middle in the hole, the 5-6 hole. Not the 5-6 hole, sorry. In the 4-5 hole, up the middle by second base, you as a first baseman may think, hey, I'm going to really stretch my range to the second baseman's area because I know I got the pitcher coming over. If the pitcher's not there, that pitcher should maybe not even be on the mound because he should be covering. That should be taught from a young age. Then the first baseman's probably thinking, I got to slide over, get that any kind of ball I can get to, because if I don't get to it, it's going out to right field. But if I can get to it, I can then make the throw to the pitcher covering the bag. Now, after contact, first baseman, you're going for everything you can get. You're covering the bag after you determine, and again, if the ball is hit to third base, shortstop, up the middle to the pitcher, you're going to know right away, I got to go cover the bag. But anything that's hit within your range, you got to be thinking, I'm going for that ball. So first, think about the ground ball, then covering the bag. Next episode, I'm going to break down exactly some key points to help a first baseman save your team multiple runs every season. And for the lower levels, it could be dozens of runs every season. And we're going to talk about the proper way that the first baseman should play a throw coming to him at first base. And we're going to talk about exactly how to save a bunch of runs. We'll break it down. This is a major game changer when it comes to working with a lot of first basemen. I've seen this be a real issue, and this can definitely be something that saves a lot of runs if you learn a couple strategies and the mindset when you are covering the bag. We'll get into that in episode 29. But first, go over to 8020baseball.com and check out all the helpful videos, the articles, the podcasts. I put a bunch of time and work getting you guys some really useful stuff. So go over to 8020baseball.com, check out those videos, the articles. You'll even see the first base video there, and I actually illustrate some of these moves. And if you want a professional baseball consultant, a professional coaching consultant to answer all your coaching questions while saving you all the guesswork, please reach out to me, Coach Bo at 8020baseball.com, and we can definitely set something up where I can work with you. Maybe we do something like a 20-30 minute coaching call once a week. We can tailor it to best fit your needs, especially youth coaches that you're doing something else for a living. You're a lawyer, you're working construction, you're a mechanic, you're working in the bank, whatever. You're a teacher, you're doing something that has nothing to do with baseball. For all of you, which is mostly everybody listening to this, reach out and we can set something up and I can answer all your coaching questions. I can save you all the guesswork, give you specific solutions, drills, everything you need to go out there and be ready to coach up your team, your players as best as possible. All right, guys, this has been Coach Bo. Take care. We'll see you in episode 29. Bye for now.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Experience.
This is a really good team, and so you have to earn everything you have against them and take opportunities when they present themselves.
Take it to the field.